My name is Jimmie Hooks. I was 8 years old when World War II began. I lived 2 blocks from USO building here in DeRidder. And I had a lot of memories of the USO building and the war and what was going on in DeRidder at that time. I watched the USO building being built here, and every day I'd get on my bicycle and ride over here and watch it for a while. And it looked like it was a bed of ants. There just so many people working on that building. They going up so fast. And I just imagine how fast it went up. Living in a small town, it was hard to see that buildings could be built so big in a small town like this. And I haven't traveled much except other small towns. USO building was, to me, a giant building, and I was really impressed with it and awed at the size of it. And I recall when they opened it up, I've learned if I get there early in the morning that the ladies there knew me, and I got there before the began opening for the soldiers. I would go and find a dime on my dad's dresser or something, and they'd give me the biggest old malt you ever seen. And this packed full of ice cream. It was so good. My mother would always often wonder why I wasn't so hungry some days, because normally I had a good appetite. But I remember the one most impressive thing I ever seen was when the cavalry marched past our front door on Bottomley Street towards Singer. One after another, hundreds and hundreds of horses marched in front of us. And we'd sit there, and the kids, and we would watch them and yell and talk to them and yell at them as they went by. And I remember one day during the maneuvers, they actually had a war in DeRidder, and they had tanks and half-tracks in DeRidder. And us kids, we would get on our bicycles and we would ride around and try to keep up with the Blue Army and the Red Army. And one day, while they were having the maneuvers, an airplane came so low that the wing actually clipped, barely touched the top of a big oak tree right next to our house. And that was a kind of a spooky thing. I think the pilot got in trouble over that, but I'm not sure. We were really happy and thrilled to see such a thing. And also I remember about the half-tracks and the tanks that went through town, and they would have these wars, and they would shoot. We hear they shoot pop, 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 pop like that, and we'd get the spent bullets when we could, and we would keep the casings. Of course, the children had the most casings, were the most popular, and they bragged about it. I wasn't as lucky about it as some of them. Some of them just knew how to get it. And one thing that I can recall is the men that we met and during World War II. We'd wake up some mornings, and you see there was a bus route that went from Fort Pope to DeRidder. And if the soldiers missed the last route back to Fort Pope, they were stuck. And we'd wake up in the morning, they'd be sleeping in the side yard where we lived on Bottomley Street. At that time, where Dr. Fisher's office was a vacant lot, and the house next to it was the one I lived in. And my mother would cook what she could and served them, and we had coffee for them when we could get them, because sugar was rationed. Everything was rationed. We had these little stamps that we'd get, and my dad would walk to work so he could save enough gas stamps so twice a year he could had enough stamps for gas to drive to Arkansas to see his mother. And I remember my sisters talking about nylon hose, or silk hose actually then, and they were on the black market, I think, that time. And if a girl had a silk hose, she was in good shape. She was really thrilled over it. I had a sad story to happen one time. My father built a garage apartment to help was some of the housing problem in DeRidder. There was such an influx of people. And there was one man that just stood out to me. I wish I could remember his name. He was a sergeant. And to us, he was just a giant of a man. I mean, he was huge. And he'd get out and play with us boys in the neighborhood, Donald Ray Fuller, Jimmie Holding, and some of the other boys. And he would pass the football, and we would play football with them, and we all looked up to him. He was deported to North Africa, and one day I learned his family called my dad and mother, and he was killed in action over in Africa. That was a sad time for me. We learned to love that man. We've had some really good experiences. I remember one time when, before alcohol was voted out of DeRidder, I remember my father talking about it. They let a whole bunch of soldiers loose in DeRidder, and they were going to be shipped overseas. And it kind of got wild, I think. I was in the house. I didn't get out. But my dad was standing outside of West Brothers, and this big old fellow says, "I think I'll just kick your window in." And Dad looked up at him and says, "Well, I can't do anything about it. Go ahead." So he did. He just kicked the window in. And shortly after that, they had a meeting at the churches, and they voted out alcohol in DeRidder. That was quite a thing in DeRidder, and I can remember how the people feel about it. And it lasted that way for many, many years. I suppose there could be many other thoughts if I spent a little more time thinking about it, but it were good years. Those were good years. And I do want to say two more things. One is that America was together. On the school yard, people brought scrap iron, and there's a huge pile of scrap iron gathered that students brought for the war effort. And they would have, at night, occasionally they'd have air raid drills. And everybody was expected when the big horn went off. I guess it was Longbell's horn, but I'm not sure. And all the lights in DeRidder were turned off. And another thing I remember was the stars that people put on the windows of their loved ones that were served overseas. I can't recall which color, but one color star represented the loss of a child or the loss of a loved one. When we go to town and as a child, we'd go to the movies. There was always a line there at the movies. And there were always soldiers on the streets. And we never felt threatened or never felt in any way that we could be harmed. And we could ride all over DeRidder during that time on our bicycles, and we were safe. Times have changed, but my memories are pretty strong sometimes on these times, and even as a child. And I saw real love. It was my one sister married a man from Dakota, North Dakota, Blair Nichols. The other married a man here from DeRidder. They both served. That's Clifford Bradley. Well, that's enough for the day, I suppose. Enjoyed telling you about what I remember as an 8-year-old boy and the feelings I had towards our country and the pride we had in our country and the sacrifice that everybody in our country was willing to make. I don't see that anymore. Not from my men fighting. They're good. They're doing their job. But I don't see the civilians doing it. That breaks my heart.